Hello, and welcome to the third video in this multi-reader sync series for factory automation. In this video, I will continue to configure my two-camera application and show more advanced settings for MRS, including timeouts and PTP synchronization. I'll start off on the MRS settings page of Setup Tool on my primary reader. I can double check that this is the primary device in the settings section. Here I can also see the triggering mode and MRS group name. The options for trigger mode are independent triggering and group triggering, and this setting will switch when a reader is added to or removed from an MRS group. The next section down is secondary camera response. These settings only need to be adjusted on the primary camera, and these two values determine how long after completing its own decoding the primary device should wait for messages from the secondary devices. This delay can be set in milliseconds or millimeters depending on whether the application is dependent on an encoder. I generally set a true timeout rather than a distance check. Either way, the higher your slider value, the longer your secondary readers will have to properly decode and transfer results. It's important not to make your timeout too low or you will lose results. Also, do not set the timeout too high because it may increase your overall trigger time and conflict with subsequent triggers. The final settings on the MRS page are all related to PTP, or Precision Time Protocol. PTP is an industry standard protocol which is used to synchronize clocks on a local computer network with sub-microsecond accuracy. It is separate from the MRS protocol, but it works in tandem for very well coordinated triggering. Not all applications require PTP. I recommend using it when you have external lighting for your application so you can coordinate lighting flashes to increase brightness or avoid glare from cross-lighting. PTP works off of a similar schema to MRS where one device coordinates clocking for the group. So after enabling PTP on all devices in the group, you will need to set all but one as secondary camera only. Checking this box ensures that this reader cannot be the PTP group leader. I will make my primary MRS reader my PTP leader as well. In the case that the added load may affect decoding on the primary reader, you can make a secondary reader the PTP leader. However you set your protocol, you must ensure that PTP is enabled on all relevant readers and that they are all in slave mode except for one, which must be in master mode. If the PTP status on any reader is disabled or listening, then the protocol will fail. Enabling PTP can affect your wiring requirements because PTP groups should very much be isolated from each other. While having multiple MRS groups connected to one network switch may be acceptable, it is not recommended to have PTP groups on the same local network because the follower devices may not know which leader to sync with. Keep this in mind, especially if your application uses PTP elsewhere in the system, with PLCs or other sensors, for example. The last setting for MRS are trigger synchronization settings. This is the key benefit of using PTP with MRS, so you should enable them to work together if using PTP. There are two sliders in this section which control distinct aspects of trigger condition. The first slider, time between trigger start and synchronized acquisition timestamp, allows you to account for the communication delay between readers. This delay value is applied to the trigger timestamp. It should be greater than twice the ping value between the secondary and primary reader and consistent across all devices in the group. A good generic value is 10,000 microseconds. The second slider, local offset added to the synchronized acquisition timestamp, may vary from reader to reader. This value allows you to control the timing of external lighting connected to the trigger of each reader. If more light and lower exposure times would be beneficial, you can leave this value as 0 and all the devices and lights will trigger simultaneously, which will maximize brightness. However, if cross-lighting could cause hotspots or lens flares for some readers, you may want the lights to illuminate with a time offset. On such readers, you should set this value to at least twice the exposure time of the primary reader. As you can see with this offset, my images are much darker because my readers are triggering and illuminating at slightly different times. If you want to read both codes in these images, I can adjust the multi-code settings on my primary device, and they will apply to the entire group. That concludes this video. Thank you for watching. In the next video in this series, I will show you how to debug common MRS problems.